All right, we're going to go ahead and there'll be some background noise. The noise quality here is not great, and the narration is going to be hesitant because it's shooting from the hip. I'm going to do my best. All right, so this is an introduction to lateral violence in nursing, as told by an old white dude in a Red Sox hat. My name's Gerard Susi. I'm a registered nurse, certified in hospice and palliative nursing. I'm the chief concierge in a practice called Concierge Humora. Lateral violence in nursing, there's a good amount of literature out there. Here are just a few grabs. Dr. Marshall Tobabin says that she writes about horizontal violence. You'll see a few different terms, but she says that it's hostile, aggressive, and harmful behavior by a nurse or by a group of nurses towards a coworker or a group of nurses via attitudes, actions, words, and other behaviors. Hostile, aggressive, harmful. Herbert Dunn, writing in the Herbert Dunn says that nurses will talk about each other. They'll lie or in some way undermine each other to control, humiliate, denigrate, or injure the dignity of oppressed workers. I think he pulls a punch there about injuring the dignity, and it can even go further than just injuring dignity. Dr. Rosemary Taylor points out that researches suggest that lateral violence may be so ingrained in the nursing culture that individual nurses do not recognize it when they witness or experience it. Think about that. It's so ingrained into the culture that we don't recognize it when we see it, or even when we're the recipients, the targets, the victims of it. So the American Nurses Association put out a position statement called Incivility, Bullying, and Workplace Violence 8 years ago. And it's a lengthy thing. Two pieces jumped out at me right away, or two pieces that I want to emphasize here. One is using a system to categorize workplace violence developed by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. They identified several types, and type 3 violence is what we're concerned with, because that's violence by one employee who attacks or threatens another employee. Type 3 violence. And what the authors of the position statement say is those who witness workplace violence and do not acknowledge it, who choose to ignore it, or who fail to report it, are in fact perpetuating it. If you don't do something, you're keeping it going. All right, so here's the Red Sox hat. I'm going to use it as a time machine, and we're going to travel back to the magical year of 2004, because that's when the Red Sox won the World Series for the first time since 1918. And it was just a magical year to be in Boston. And it was also a magical year for me playing in the big leagues at Big Wicket Hospital. My orientation there included a class taught by Dr. Martha Griffin using her research, teaching cognitive rehearsal as a shield for lateral violence, an intervention for newly licensed nurses. That's why it was part of the standard orientation, new hire orientation, because at Big Wicket in particular, at many hospitals in general, even an experienced nurse coming in from the outside can be seen as different and can potentially be a target for lateral violence. So this was one of the classes based on her research, and we'll just touch on it briefly from the abstract, that she identified newly licensed nurses specifically as a group that is vulnerable to lateral violence. I mentioned anybody who's different is potentially a target for lateral violence. And newly licensed nurses, nurses who are just out of school, nurses who are generally younger than the average nurse. They're targeted, they're vulnerable. So this whole intervention was to say, look, let's teach you what lateral violence is all about. Because remember the earlier quote, we don't even recognize it if we see it or experience it. So 26 licensed nurses, newly licensed nurses in her group, were taught about lateral violence and also the use of a particular tool, the use of cognitive rehearsal as a technique to have a shield, a counter to instances of lateral violence. And these shields were literally, small laminated cue cards with written visual cues for what the most appropriate response is to the most common forms of lateral violence. So it's a cue card. Something happens to you, that sounds like, You look at the cue card, say, yes, that is this form of lateral violence, and the most appropriate response for me right now is XYZ, so here we go. So that was the tool. All right. We will look at this in greater detail, but it was literally the size of an ID card. It would go with your ID card and other stuff on your lanyard or on your reel. All right. So they did this whole intervention. They sent these new nurses out. And a year later, they were brought back and participated as focus groups. They responded to some 6 open-ended questions that elicited some discussion about their experiences. And they said that, what they learned about lateral violence and specifically the cognitive responses, it helped them confront the offender, and not only confront them, but confront them in the moment. Somebody says something, boom, that's the time to intervene. And they said that helped them do that. They said it wasn't easy. Confrontation was described as difficult, but it did result in the behavior being resolved, or it did resolve that situation. Okay, that all sounds pretty good. All right, so let's look at the 10 most frequent forms of lateral violence as abstracted from several sources and as listed on these little cue cards, on these shields. All right. So the most frequently encountered form is nonverbal innuendo. Now, innuendo, I actually had to look that up, and it's a veiled or equivocal reflection on character or reputation. It's a hint. It's an insinuation. It's innuendo. Tear this apart a little bit. It's veiled. It's hidden. It's equivocal. You can deny. It's deniable. It's not in your face. It's an innuendo, and it's particularly aimed at someone's reputation or character. Gossip. All right, so nonverbal innuendo. Nonverbal innuendo was the most frequently encountered, and that can take the form of someone's facial expression in response to something that you say or in seeing you. It can be exasperation, it can be anger, it can be ridicule, it can be a posture. Body language says so much. So, nonverbal innuendo. The next is verbal affront. Now, just like innuendo, I thought it best to look up what is an affront. And pow, it's to do that. That's to insult someone, especially to their face, and to do it with language like "fu" or behavior like flipping the finger at them. That's an affront. That is like, wow, and to their face. It's deliberate. It's offensive. It's an insult. It's the intent is to insult, right? And these are verbal, but they can be kind of covert. They can be kind of hidden, not so readily apparent, maybe, or deniable, or they can be just like, someone swearing to you in your face. Again, the idea of deniability, saying something in a sarcastic tone, always gives the perpetrator the opportunity to say, hey, can't you take a joke? I was just kidding. Another way, another form of affront is to respond to someone, say, who's just asking for help. You say, "Oh, excuse me, may I ask you a question?" And they turn and they shout at you, "What? Can't you see I'm busy?" All right. Undermining. That's turning away. That's becoming unavailable. That's like leaving someone on their own, um, to sink or swim. And if the intent is malicious, the hope is that they'll sink, which brings us into the idea that the the lines between these different forms of lateral violence are kind of fluid, or lateral violence can cross multiple categories. One can turn into the other. Um, in addition to undermining, just becoming unavailable, withholding information, not telling somebody something that would be important for them to know, with regards to their practice, with regards to, say, setting up an instrument tray or preparing for a procedure. They're counting on you for some guidance and help, and you deliberately leave it out, withhold it. Um, Same too with a patient. I mean, think about it. I'm turning this patient over to you. I'm telling you some things, but there are some things that I'm going to let you find out for yourself. Yikes. That leads into sabotage. I mean, deliberately setting up a negative situation, turning away, becoming unavailable, undermining someone so that they'll fail, not giving them all the information they need to succeed. That all becomes sabotage, deliberately setting up a negative situation. And, it may be an angry devil, the idea of sabotage. It's a mean spirited, ugly thing, but never underestimate perpetrators' ability to really escape accountability for even the most egregious acts. Who, me? I didn't do that. Infighting is really pettiness and bickering within a group. It's not so much disagreeing around an issue related to practice or policy that has high stakes, that is important, but more it's just arguing about stupid stuff like, when the holiday party is going to be, or what the monthly sunshine fund shakedown is going to be, or, you know, dividing people into camps, infighting, whose side are you on? And it can escalate. It can get pretty mean spirited and angry. Related to fighting, related to things going bad, there's scapegoating, which is, hey, you know, it's their fault. It's that person's fault. It's those people's fault. It's that group's fault. If we just take care of them, then we won't have a problem. The problem will be gone. Backstabbing. This is putting it mildly. Complaining, but the person you're complaining about isn't there. It really does mean, stabbing somebody in the back, going behind their back, doing something dirty to them when they're not there to know about it or defend themselves. Failing to respect privacy, that can be, barging into places, walking into a closed office, just throwing open the door, even if you know someone's in there, or, it could be more sneaky, just kind of like, eavesdropping on a conversation, not respecting someone's privacy. Um, Finally, breaking confidences. I'm sharing this with you. Please don't tell anybody. Nope, my lips are sealed. Hey, you know what? So, those are the 10 aspects of lateral violence that Dr. Griffin taught folks in that class, and that she also gave them techniques or specific words, sentences to just like to use, canned text to use when confronted with any of these. All right. This is kind of small print, and there's a lot of them. So we're going to look at two, a case study. One of them is the idea of sabotage, and the other is backstabbing. All right. So sabotage, deliberately setting up a negative situation. If you feel that, hey, I think I've been sabotaged here, the appropriate response, the learned response should be, in a very neutral voice, that there's more to this situation than meets the eye. Could you and I meet with the charge nurse in private and explore what happened? All right, that's the card. Backstabbing, you've got someone going on and on, complaining about somebody who isn't there. The learned response, the practiced response should be, I don't feel right talking about them. I don't know. I wasn't there. I really don't know the facts. Have you spoken to them? You're telling me about Sophie. Have you talked to Sophie? All right. So that's the ideal. Now let's take a trip to the year 2007, to our first case of the real world. And if anybody was a Red Sox fan in 2007, that was this year when Clay Buchholz, in his second major league start in his rookie year, threw a no-hitter. This is the final pitch. And I was there for that game. I was there with a work colleague, Tony, because we worked in a specialty ICU with 20 beds and lots of guys amongst the 100-plus nurses on staff. Lots of guys meant lots of season tickets, lots of seats available to Red Sox games. So Tony and I went to that game. Tony and I were also on this night shift together, where at some quiet point in the middle of the night, maybe we were all standing around, Leslie started trashing Amy, and Amy wasn't there. And Leslie was really going to town with the things that she had to say, calling into question all kinds of aspects of her practice and character. It was really, really vile. It was horrible. And, backstabbing in its worst form. So the response should be calmly, neutrally, hey, Leslie, I'm uncomfortable. I really don't know what you're talking about with Amy. I don't know the facts. Hey, Leslie, have you talked to Amy? That's what we rehearsed. That was on the cue cards. That's the idea. But we were just horrified. We looked at each other horrified, like, what is this? And we slowly backed away. And we backed away knowing what we were backing away from, and knowing that it was really a cowardly thing to do. If we were baseball players, we'd be striking out and looking like jerks doing it. But that response is, people count on that. Bullies count on shock and intimidation and silence. They want people to be horrified, and so that they'll leave them alone. And the other thing about bullies is they don't speak just for themselves. They don't act just for themselves. They get overt and covert support and agreement, that you might or might not even recognize. Right? Here's the chickens, but they're way there in the background. There's the cat. All right. From 2007, we go back a year to 2006. That year, they didn't win. The Red Sox didn't win the pennant, and they didn't throw. Nobody threw a no-hitter. They finished in the middle of the American League East. But that was also the year where I came in at the end of a week, at the end of a schedule, with the new schedule starting the following Sunday, not out yet. So there I am on a Thursday night. I finally get the schedule for next week, and I'm on Monday night, Wednesday night, Saturday night, on, off, on, off, on. And I got nauseous just seeing this. And I said to the nurse manager who prepares the schedule, I can't work this. I mean, literally, physically, I'm not a young guy. This isn't gonna work. And her response was to just like, not my problem. So I'm not really good at like switching with people and stuff. I don't know, but I never have been. But I was just desperate. Like, can anybody help me? And somebody said, yeah, sure. I'll switch here. I'll take you Friday, take my Tuesday. I'll take your Friday. So, all right. And in talking more to that person, it's like, yeah, it's such a mess. She does the schedule at the very last minute. She doesn't really pay attention to what she's doing. She does it in front of the TV and she brags about it. And Yikes. Later on in that shift, this same nurse and I were just having a conversation. And the idea or the question was, if you've got a 100 ml bag to infuse in an hour as an admixture, what rate? And I said, well, you know, the classes that I took on such and such said allow for all of the front end tubing to clear before the med starts being administered, and then the back end of that tubing to get cleared of medication. So it's not so much 100 an hour; it's 125 an hour to get the 100 in plus the pre and post flush. And no, she said, no, you're wrong. It's 100. You know, if it's a 100 mil bag and it's to go in an hour, and that's that. And I don't know anybody out there knows anything about prepackaged fluids and stuff like that, but there's a thing called overfill, and you got to account for that too. There's more than 100 mLs in a 100 ml bag. So anyway, it was just like this discussion. It wasn't a heated argument or anything like that. It was just like, back and forth. So I come in the following Monday night for my shift. Hi, everybody, and bang. Hey, here's a whole warning. Here's a whole workup. Here's a whole package of stuff we got to go through because you are making serious IV med errors. And I'm like, wait, what? This came out of what? And it wasn't like a quiet thing. Here's a note in my mailbox, or here's an email. It's like everybody knew and was like, ooh, let's see, blah, blah, blah. Crazy stuff. Fortunately, there's collective bargaining. And through part of this process, the person who joined me said, listen, is there a different unit you'd like to work on? I said, sure. But, there's more to the situation than meets the eye. Could we meet in private and explore what happened? I mean, come on. Here's a term that I didn't learn until quite recently, but it articulates kind of the level of disorientation that I experienced kind of as part of that whole event. And it was gaslighting. And gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation in which the abuser, in the context of abuse, attempts to sow self-doubt and confusion in their victim's mind. It's based on a play where the gaslights flicker and the woman who sees it happening is like, oh, those gaslights are flickering. And the other person says, nah, you're crazy. The other person was manipulating her. They're seeking to gain power and control over the other person by distorting reality and forcing the other person to question their own judgment and their own intuition. I saw that light flickering, but he insisted it wasn't. Are my eyes not working anymore? You question your own sense of what just happened here. And from the point of view of a perpetrator, gaslighting is also another way to another road to deniability and a way to deflect any accountability or responsibility. All right. This is my late wife, Jean, and she was an educator and a counselor and a nurse, and particularly in adult mental health. And one of the things that she pointed out is that the workplace is often where we recapitulate, where we reenact unresolved issues from our family of origin. And we'll think about what that means. That for someone who was recapitulating an unresolved issue from a family of origin, for someone who had issues with a parent or a sibling, going into the workspace for them can become like going into the home. And different colleagues can take on the identities of these family members. I mean, don't need to get too deeply into the psychodynamics of all this, but we do it all the time. We all do. I mean, I'm going to say that. And one example of my own experience was a colleague looking across at a bed at me and saying in a very exasperated tone, "You remind me of my ex-husband." And I'm not her ex-husband. And this is an entirely different situation. So you can see where that recapitulation can really mess things up. All right, I've gone on too long with that, but it was something we talked about. All right, coming forward, 2020. Wow, 25 minutes. Um, Finish at the bottom of the pack. I chose 2020 because that was the year that a fairly recent national nursing workforce survey came out. And in that survey, they came to some findings that for gender, race, and ethnicity, 90.5% of nurses are women, and 81% of nurses are white. 7.2% are Asian, 6.7% are Black, and 5.1% are Hispanic or Latina. And 6.7% Black, that's half the rate of Black population in America, which is 13, 14%. So this will make sense in a minute. Here's a publication called Priceonomics, and they rated the top 100 universities by diversity. That is, the most diverse universities rate on top. Here's the top 10. And this line here represents kind of the 50% mark. So with the percentage of white students being the blue bar, you can see that none of these top 10 colleges or universities have anything, approaching 50% white population. Green is Black student body. Yellow is Latina, Hispanic, and red is Asian, and purple is other. So kind of like looking up and down this list real quick, you can see the proportions of the various populations. So that's the top of the list, the top 16. And many of them are in California or New York. Here's the bottom 16. All right, here's the least diverse, the most white colleges and universities. And if nursing were a college or a university, based on the data that we just looked at, nursing would be about as diverse as nursing is as diverse as the University of Vermont or Brigham Young University, the Mormon University, or Clemson in the South. And Clemson has the largest Black population of any of these three. So, if nursing's at the bottom of the list as far as diversity goes. This is a cartoon series or a sketchbook from the New Yorker, and lateral violence. Here's a polite way to say lateral violence: veiled criticism, or maybe backhanded compliment. And of all of the different criticisms, I just chose one: withholding. Withholding is a form of lateral violence that Dr. Griffin identified, and Liana Fink, in her depiction of it, it looks it doesn't look violent, but yeah, that is what it looks like. Being absent, not providing something. So, A&A, incivility, bullying, workplace violence. If we're trying to develop a spectrum of lateral violence, would it be that withholding is a little violent, backstabbing is more violent, sabotage is even more violent? I mean, where does it end, or what's the most violent? And I'm going to say it's racism in nursing. Even the A&A will say that, has said that racism in nursing is a serious problem. So let's take a look. And before we take a look at the harms that racism in nursing does to nurses who aren't white, let's look at the advantages of racism in nursing for nurses who are. All right, that's the end of this presentation. Stay tuned or follow on for part 2.